In this video, we're going to tell you about Senusert I and his time. We'll be talking about form, history, and many more interesting things that few people know. Let's get started. The above view shows the ruinous remains of the pyramid belonging to Senusret I, who built his pyramid about 1.5 kilometers to the south of his father's pyramid, Amenemhat I. This is the second pyramid constructed in the 12th dynasty, and an exciting period which shows rapid development in pyramid complex design during the Middle Kingdom. One gets the sense that the architects were still finding their feet during the long hiatus in pyramid building from the end of the Old Kingdom, 6th dynasty, to the start of the 12th dynasty of the Middle Kingdom. Exploration. One of the early accounts of the pyramid is from J.S. Perring, who briefly comments, Figure 3 is a section of the southern pyramid. From having been built with a soft limestone, it has crumbled away until it has the appearance of a round hillock, and in fact, many of the adjacent desert hills are much more pyramidal. It is, however, more advantageously placed, is larger, and has been constructed with larger masses of stone, and apparently with more care than the northern pyramid. Perring's section of South Pyramid and plan of Lisht pyramids is shown below. Lepsius would visit Lisht shortly after Perring in 1843, but comments little on Senusret's pyramid, other than its ruinous state and some small pyramids in close proximity, though he would provide a more detailed description of Amenemhat's pyramid. It would take another 4 decades before modern excavation would begin on Senusret's pyramid, and this was undertaken by Gaston Maspero in 1883. Maspero would succeed in opening both pyramids, but was thwarted in reaching the burial chambers due to the high water table. He states, "At Lisht, unforeseen obstacles forced me to suspend work. In one of the pyramids, Senusret Pyramid, water gushed out under the workman's pickaxe when we were barely 5 or 6 meters from the antechamber." Maspero would find items along the robber's route that suggested that Senusret's tomb had been plundered. Maspero's work on the pyramid was quite superficial, though thankfully our knowledge of the pyramid would improve thanks to the work of J.E. Gautier and Gautier Jequier, who undertook excavations there in 1894-1895. The longest expedition at Lisht was undertaken by the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, MMA, which amounted to 14 seasons from 1906 to 1936. Unfortunately, detail on their excavations are brief. What we know of these excavations is spread across the Bulletin of the Metropolitan Museum, BMMA, which provides a summary of their work. No detailed monograph of the pyramid was published. According to Dieter Arnold, some outstanding discoveries, such as the burial of the Lady Senebtisi and the pyramid texts of the burial chamber of Senusret I, were published in monographs. It is difficult to say what additional publications were planned. The material for as many as 9 volumes remained, but no publications appeared after 1934 until Christine Lilliquist, curator of the Department of Egyptian Art, renewed the program of publication for the expedition records housed in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The expedition archives and further fieldwork by Arnold and others between 1904 and 1989 would provide us with the clearest picture to date of Senusret's pyramid complex, and was published in a 3-volume work, The South Cemeteries of Lisht. As far as pyramid complexes go, Senusret would not follow the design of Amenemhat's complex, but more closely copy the rather repetitive design of pyramid complexes built at the latter end of the Old Kingdom. This Old Kingdom design appears to be embraced only by Senusret, with the remaining kings of the Middle Kingdom, including his father, demonstrating more unique designs. The name of Senusret's pyramid was Senusret is viewing the 2 lands, this name having been found on plaques found inside pyramid foundation deposits. The size of the pyramid was first determined by Gautier and Jequier, who cleared some of the pyramid corners and made wide trenches through the debris-covered pyramid in order to reach the pyramid core and casing. They would give a base length of 107 meters, and a casing angle of 49 degrees, which provided a completed height of 61 meters, though the ruinous mound actually only reached 22 meters in height. These dimensions have subsequently been revised by Joseph Dorner, who gives an average base length of 105.228 meters, and adds that the pyramid deviates about 1 degree 30 seconds from true north to northwest. This puts the base length of the pyramid as similar to that of Menkaur's pyramid at Giza and Neferirkar's pyramid at Abu Sir, and is thought to be an intended 200 cubits. The simplest Saqqid solution for the observed angle of the surviving casing would be a Saqqid of 6 palms. The Saqqid is the horizontal displacement from a vertical of 1 cubit, which has 7 palms. Imagine a right-angled triangle whose height is 7 palms and whose base is 6 palms. This would provide an angle of 49 degrees, 24 seconds. The pyramid base is markedly larger than Amenemhat's, which is thought to be 160 cubits, though Amenemhat had a greater casing angle of 54 degrees that would agree to a Saqqid of 5 palms. This would give Amenemhat's pyramid a height of 112 cubits, or just over 4 cubits less than Senusret's. Superstructure construction also appears to have differed from Amenemhat's pyramid. Gautier and Jequier's excavations on the superstructure would discover an interesting framework of crude masonry walls radiating from the center of the pyramid, as can be seen from the image left, with the spaces filled with debris, rubble, and sand. According to Arnold, the stability of this fill was strengthened on its outer faces with mortar, where it met the rear of the backing stones, which helped support the pyramid casing. This mortared outer edge of the fill was made into steps about 1 cubit wide, on which the backing stones were laid. The casing stones were arranged as headers and varied between 2.100 and 3.50 meters deep. The casing stones don't appear to be of a uniform. The entrance is in the middle of the north face, and access today is now not possible. I have numbered the blocks on both modern and excavation images to help orientate the scene. Pharaoh is part of the granite plug which sealed the entrance passage. This, the robbers avoided by bypassing the granite-lined passage by tunneling into the softer limestone along the western side of the passage, the robbers' entrance being 4 in the image. Figs 2 and 3 show the plan and section of the entrance passage by Gautier and Jequier. The robbers, having noticed the granite plugs, decided to initially cut through some of the core masonry to the west of the passage for some 2.5 meters. At this point, they tried their luck and turned east, cutting through the limestone walls, which lined the upper 11 meters of the entrance passage. They must have been dejected when they came across a long granite plug, whose remains approach a length of 8.5 meters, barring their way. They decided, therefore, to continue cutting through the west limestone wall of the passage, tracking the granite plugs until they came to another barrier. This barrier being that the walls of the passage were now of granite. If you look at the plan above, you will notice where the first and second granite plug stones meet, a fractured line is drawn. The momentum of the first plug stone, hitting the second, caused significant fractures to its lower end, and this despite what appears to be a cushioning feature present on the upper face of the second plug stone. Arnold reports that here a horizontal groove was cut into the granite, some 27 centimeters high and 20 centimeters deep, which he suggested may have held a sandbag or wooden beam to soften the impact of the collision. The robbers, having tunneled down to the granite walls of the passage, appear to have broken into the passage, possibly helped by the lower end of the second plug stone being fractured as it collided with the third plug stone. According to more modern plans by Arnold, this breach into the passage, Chambrin plan, has 2 outlets which lead to tunnels east and west of the granite walls, where the robbers once, again, cut into the softer limestone behind the granite. These tunnels are closed with sand, and it's not known which route the robbers took to access the burial chamber beyond. It appears that Maspero did not clear out these robber tunnels, but elected to cut out the lower granite plugs from the chambre. Gautier and Jequier comment on Maspero's work. Many months were spent clearing this passage, as the blocks had to be broken with a cold chisel. The path thus cut, 40 meters long, reached a depth of 22 meters below the level of the pavement. Maspero and every explorer since has been thwarted by the higher water table, and so the design of the burial chamber is an unknown, though it is believed to have been successfully robbed. This is due to items found during Maspero's excavations, which are not particularly detailed. He tells us that the remains of several wooden boxes containing funerary goods were found between two of the gigantic plug stones, and one would assume this was the PV chambre. The Riz Ruby Hamzawi found many fragments, including alabaster vases in the shape of geese, a dagger sheath of thin gold, and also some canopic jars. It appears that the granite plugs do not extend to the very end of the inclined passage, whose angle is some 25 degrees, but that a space was reserved at the end of the passage for sand. This sand barrier would act as a cushion to prevent the leading plug from crashing into and damaging any horizontal passage. The dimensions of the entrance passage are quite small, being 0.82 meters wide by 1.05 meters high, 11 palms by 2 cubits, though larger than Amenemhat's, which display a width of 75 centimeters and 86 to 92 centimeters high. Clearly, no stone sarcophagus could transit such a small passage, it being only suitable for a wooden coffin and funerary goods. In order to introduce a sarcophagus and the large masonry required for the burial chamber, a larger and lower entrance cut was made first, and on completion of the burial chamber, this larger access route would be filled in, and the smaller entrance passage built above it, in a similar manner to what we see at Amenemhat's pyramid. Though the entrance passage is quite small, it does exhibit some strange features. The masonry makeup is quite strange, in that the walls in the upper part of the passage are mostly of limestone. Gautier and Jequier would say that the upper 11 meters of the passage walls are of limestone. They don't comment on the floor or ceiling stones. But from Arnold's work, it appears that all floor and ceiling stones of the passage are of granite. His drawings also suggest that all the wall stones on the west side of the passage are of limestone down to the PV chambre, whilst on the east wall they are all limestone masonry down to the PV chambre, except for the uppermost stone on the east wall, which is shown as granite. If you look at the excavation image on page 5, this granite wall stone can be seen to the left of the plugstone 5, whilst to the right of the plugstone, one can see the lighter color of the limestone wall stone. It is a strange mix of masonry, when ideally you would want all the wall stones to be of granite for added security. It's unlikely that Amenemhat's complex exhausted such supply from the massive Old Kingdom complexes, but for some reason, Senusert refrained from using such material. The schematic image above gives a rough idea of how the upper part of the passage, west, looks with the two surviving plugstones removed. After a short distance, tunneling through the core masonry, they cut through one of the limestone wall blocks and continued tunneling through these wall blocks until they hit the granite wall stones lower down. Here they made another breach through the last limestone wall block in order to get behind the granite wall stones. A similar breach is also on the east side of the passage, and it's unknown which breach the robbers used to access the burial chamber. The upper plugstones appear to be the largest. Arnold would give the first plugstone as about 8.5 meters long, with the second plugstone of similar size, with SEE plugstones about 20 tons. The granite plugstones after the initial two large ones, which are still in place today, appear to be smaller in length. Charles Wilbur visited the pyramid on January 22, 1883, and reported at the time that Maspero's men had cut through 30 feet of granite plugstone, which entailed the removal of 2 long, granite obelisk-like stones. Wilbur would revisit the pyramid on April 6, 1883, where it was hoped that the passage would be open in a month. His next entry on the pyramid is January 16, 1886, where there is discussion of using water pumps to remove the water. 30 feet equates to 9.14 meters, and if the 2 plugs were of equal length, they would be around 4.5 meters each in length. The total number of plugs is not known, but Arnold thought that there may have been 7 or 8 plugs. The above schematic of the entrance passage shows the lower part of the passage to be constructed of granite, along with the water levels. On Arnold's plate 90, he shows 2 water levels, the lowest after a pumping attempt in 1986, though I can find no data on this attempt. It is thought that the end of the inclined passage would turn into a horizontal passage at some point, though the end of the inclined passage is still unknown. One of the most curious features of the entrance passage is a sequence of limestone slabs inserted into the granite floor of the passage. It's not known if these inserts extend to the upper part of the passage due to the plugstones obscuring the floor here. According to Arnold, there may have been 9 or 10 of these limestone slabs inserted into the passage floor. He gives the slabs as 55-56 centimeters long, 30 centimeters wide, and 7.5 centimeters deep, and was secured by plaster. He further notes that the spacing of these slabs, when measured along the sloping surface, do not conform to a cubit measure. He states, "It must therefore be assumed that the stones were placed according to a system of horizontal measurements, which would indeed result in 5.25 meters, 10-cubit spacings. This distance was probably marked by a cross on the surface of the slabs. Measuring, cord, and plumb were used. The measurements would have to be taken before the ceiling of the passage was put in, because afterwards the height of the passage would have been too low to stretch the cord from one slab to the next. The method of horizontal measurements would have enabled the ancient surveyors to determine the horizontal distance of the burial chamber from the passage entrance or foot of the pyramid, and thus to place it exactly in the center of the pyramid. In no other pyramid has such a device been recorded, and again we must acknowledge the precision aimed for and probably achieved by the builders of Senusert I. If I've understood Arnold correctly, the 10-cubit spacing is the horizontal distance between slabs, and that this horizontal distance is plumbed down and marked on the next slab, hence why he states this operation could only be done before the ceiling was fitted. As the passage is given as 25 degrees, then the sloped distance on the floor would be 5.79 meters or 11 cubits, which seems a whole number. But would there be a need to create such an elaborate measuring system? Surely the ancient Egyptians were mathematically astute enough to calculate this above ground and apply the sloped length to the floor of the passage. For construction purposes, 11 cubits marked along the floor is sufficient to denote a 10-cubit horizontal distance. These somewhat unique slabs appear overkill, and a solution to a problem which doesn't seem to exist. The slabs are sizable items, and the work in cutting the granite floor to receive them is time-consuming. One wonders if they had a different role altogether. Sometimes the Egyptians did not have the luxury of a sizable excavation, which was lined with masonry. For example, a narrow passage made through rock, like the lower end of the descending passage in Khufu's pyramid, would not allow a horizontal measuring scheme as shown above. There is simply no room. Indeed, in Corina Rossi's book, Architecture and Mathematics in Ancient Egypt, would state, from the comparison between written sources and actual monuments, it seems that the Egyptians measured the length of sloping corridors along the sloping surface, rather than as its projection on a theoretical horizontal plane, as we do in our modern plans. Even if we accept Arnold's method, they could just as easily mark the more durable granite floor and do without sinking a large limestone slab into the floor. In Arnold's Fig 24 left, we have a schematic view of the entrance phases of the pyramid. According to Arnold, the first phase was an entrance cut, which started some 35.4 meters from the north side of the pyramid and probably had a width also approaching 10 cubits. A similar entrance cut is used at Amenemhat's pyramid, and it is believed that such cuts were used to bring down the sizable masonry required for the king's funerary apartments, whose design is unknown as both pyramids suffer from water-table problems. Once the construction of the burial chamber was completed, they would likely fill the lower entrance cut and begin creating the small entrance passage to the burial apartments. The accurate placement of the burial chamber under the pyramid was likely calculated by marking along the lower entrance cut. Whether there was a deep shaft cut down to the burial chamber from the surface, as shown above, is also uncertain, as the Egyptians were quite adept at creating and lining chambers out of the living rock as displayed inside Menkaura's pyramid at Giza. The schematic above also suggests extensive tunneling through the Gebel, though the extent of trenching and tunneling is also uncertain. When it comes to the granite-lined upper entrance, any tunnel would have to be at least 4 meters wide, as Arnold reports a granite floor stone as 4 meters wide and possibly 0.75 meters thick. The side walls would rest on the floor stones, which were slightly dressed down to receive the wall stones. Likewise, the top of the wall stones to receive the ceiling stones. Arnold's section of the passage on his plate 90 suggests that the excavated tunnel would need to be at least 6 meters high in order to accommodate the masonry-lined passage. All this work to produce a small lined passage, 0.82 by 1.05 meters, which must have been uncomfortable for the workmen to traverse, though such a small passage would protect the king's sarcophagus, which would have to be smashed to pieces in order to extract it. The lining of the passage was likely constructed backwards from the burial chamber and eventually exit in the pavement, some 1.75 meters from the pyramid foot. It is thought that this entrance would be covered by the entrance chapel, which would appear strange, given that surely Senusert must have been aware that Old Kingdom pyramids that had this design of the entrance being found under the floor of the chapel had been looted. The next item of interest on the entrance passage is the following observation by Arnold. In the pyramid of Senusert I, however, the corridor deviates noticeably to northwest-southeast. This irregularity may give us a clue to the arrangement of or the sarcophagus exactly under the top of the tentrance, and the tentrance from the entrance corridor into the antechamber from tentrance, that it was impossible for the corridor to run along the north-south axis. The fact that our entrance corridor runs off-axis suggests that the burial chamber follows the system of the 5th Dynasty pyramids and not that of the 6th Dynasty or Amenemhat I. The above plan, part of Arnold's plate 91, we can just make out this slight tentrance of the passage, with the granite plug still in the passage. Arnold doesn't tentrance a value for this tentrance, but from his drawing, it's close to 4 degrees. To quantify the effect of such a tentrancation, say, a length of 50 meters, the tentrance end would be some 3.5 meters west of the pyramid's north-south axis. In his work, Arnold would note 3 5-dynasty pyramids whose passages show a similar deviation, those being Neferikara, Niosera, and Jequier. In the case of Jequier's pyramid, Maragioglio and Rinaldi drawings do show a similar deviation at the start of the entrance passage. However, a more modern scan of the substructure would paint a totally different unfissure. In the image, we can compare MNR's drawings to the results obtained by the 3D scan. In MNR's, the descending entrance passage deviates east slightly, whereas the scan shows the opposite, slightly to the west, before correcting itself. However, in this pyramid, we do not appear to have a deliberate attempt to manipulate the entrance passage in order to locate a chamber to a particular position within the pyramid. Nefertari I's pyramid is also uncertain and has been severely damaged. The upper image left is Borchart's plan of the substructure, whilst below we have MNR's interpretation of how the passage may have connected to a possible antechamber. However, MNR never had access to the substructure, and to date, only 2 explorers have been inside. The first being Perring, who was followed by Borchart. Nefertari's small, unfinished pyramid seems to display a clear deviation to the east, as shown on MNR's reconstruction left. A good example of passage deviation to the east is that found inside the pyramid of New Sere, as shown in Borchart's reconstruction left. Such deviation may also be present at Kentkawe, the pyramid complex to the south of Nefertari's pyramid, who was possibly a consort of that king. As best as I can determine, it seems to be a feature more associated with 5th Dynasty pyramid complexes at Abu Sir, and a feature not seen at 6th Dynasty complexes. It would seem important to some kings that the antechamber be placed on the east side of the pyramid, with the burial chamber only placed in the west, the North Chapel. Arnold provides several clues to show that the North Chapel was located in the center of the pyramid's north face and thus covering the entrance passage. He believed that it was dismantled early by robbers seeking access to the entrance. This destruction has left no traces of the chapel in its original position, as even the pavement that it once covered has been torn up by the robbers. What few fragments of the chapel that survived were found dumped either side of the entrance. The excavation image shows the cleared entrance, and around it, fragments of the destroyed chapel. They were lucky enough to recover complete cornice blocks, as well as some wall blocks, which displayed painted reliefs on their inner sides, and a ceiling block with star decoration. These, along with other fragments, allowed the expedition to complete a fairly accurate reconstruction of the chapel. In the image left, we have the early expedition's reconstruction of the North Chapel. They would give the interior height of the chapel as 3.86 meters, with the walls having a thickness of 1.046 meters or 2 cubits. A water channel with the head of a lion was also found. They suggested just one such feature on the west side, and that the roof may have sloped on this side. Arnold's reconstruction suggests one also on the east side. The remains suggested a width for the chapel of 10 cubits, 5.25 meters, and as the walls occupy 4 cubits, it would leave an internal width of 6 cubits, 3.15 meters. The length of the chapel is, unfortunately, more problematic, though Arnold would suggest that it may have been 8 cubits, measured from the foot of the pyramid. Arnold's section of the chapel gives an internal height of 7 cubits and external of 9 cubits. His plan of the chapel gives exterior as 10 cubits wide by 8 cubits long from foot of pyramid. As the walls are 2 cubits thick, this provides an interior floor space of 6 by 6 cubits in front of the large block J on which a stele was believed to have been placed. Clearly, this is a logistical challenge to the insertion of the lengthy plug stones, which still reside in the upper part of the passage today. The paved court to the wall is 20 cubits, 10.5 meters, wide on the north, west, and south sides of the pyramid. So if we take Arnold's shorter reconstruction of 8 cubits, 4.2 meters, for the length of the chapel, we only have 6.3 meters between the chapel entrance and the enclosure wall, which is clearly... This leaves us with two options. Either the chapel was built after the king was buried and the passage plugged, or a gap was purposely left in the enclosure wall to allow the introduction of the plugs. One would favor the latter option, as the chapel is a more ornate and complex construction, which one would hardly leave to your successor, who might be inclined to throw up some poor-quality mud brick structure. As the lower plug stones appear shorter in length, 4.5 meters, the inner enclosure wall chapter picture 18, the above plan of Senusert's pyramid complex, shows a sizable number of smaller pyramids which surround the king's pyramid, with these structures being placed between the inner and outer enclosure walls. The inner enclosure wall, highlighted above, protects the king's domain and divides the pyramid temple into two parts, the open court of the temple being outside, whilst the more private aspects of the temple are inside. The design is very much in keeping with the design of 5 and 6 Dynasty pyramid complexes, and would be the only pyramid of the Middle Kingdom to follow the design layout of the Old Kingdom. Why is unclear. His father Amenemhat, along with the other kings of the Middle Kingdom, all have their own unique designs, and, even though it is thought that a co-regency existed between father and son for up to 10 years, none of this appears to have rubbed off onto the son, who appears to have gone old school. The examples above of Old Kingdom complexes show the similarity apparent also in Senusert's design. Each complex had their subtle differences, be it in the number of magazines, etc., but by and large, the causeway approached the temple and connected to a long hall, which led into an open pillared court, the end of which opened onto a transverse corridor that would provide access to statue niches, offering enclosure wall hall along with access to the pyramid court. Also present was the satellite pyramid, which had its own enclosure wall placed in the southeast corner. This would be the only satellite pyramid in the Middle Kingdom, a feature omitted in future pyramid complexes. The stone enclosure wall is spaced 20 cubits, 10.50 meters, from the pyramid on the north, west, and south sides, with a greater spacing given on the east side to accommodate part of the temple, which is given as 65 cca 34.125 meters. The wall is given a base thickness of 5 cubits, 2.625 meters, whose sides incline 1 palm for 1 cubit in height, or 81 degrees 52 fern, with a rounded coping stone giving a height of 10.5 cubits. Senusert was more artistic in the design of his enclosure wall by decorating it with narrow panels, which were topped off by a Horus falcon wearing the double crown, as shown left. The above early reconstruction of the complex shows the decorated inner enclosure. Wall, this time-consuming decoration was applied also to the inside of the wall. A possible total of 200 of these panels was required to decorate the enclosure. Wall. Below the Horus falcon we have the name of the king, which could alternate between his Horus name, throne name, and birth name. Below this we have a palace facade, motif with door, and below this a fecundity figure bringing offerings. The small pyramids outside the enclosure were simply surrounded by an outer mud brick enclosure wall. The satellite pyramid. Senusert's satellite pyramid is quite unusual. Arnold would state, for unknown reasons, the Ka pyramid seems to have had special importance in the mortuary precinct, since it was enlarged, was surrounded by temple-like structures, and contained several chambers. Though it was completely excavated by the early MMA expedition in 1916 to 1917, little was recorded, such as drawings of the chambers, which meant that it had to be re-excavated in 1984-1986. Initially, the small pyramid is believed to have had a base of 30 cubits, 15.75 meters, and as was so common with satellite pyramids displayed quite a steep angle, of some 63 degrees. The angle agrees to a Cicada's 3½ palms, which means the height of the pyramid is equal to its base length, i.e. 30 cubits. Such steep slopes may have been to give the pyramid more presence above the enclosure wall. If it agreed to the pyramid's angle, it would only be 17.5 cubits tall, with its pyramidion being 7 cubits, 3.675 meters, above the top of the wall. The greater angle extends the height of the pyramidion to 19.5 cubits, 10.24 meters, above the wall and certainly more imposing. The plan left is of Senusert III's pyramid complex. Pyramid 9 had a small chamber, which was connected via a tunnel to the Pyramid Queen's tomb under the pyramid. Whether such a design was planned for Pyramid 8 is not known, and so far excavations have found no connections to an undiscovered chamber under the pyramid. So, as it currently stands, Pyramid 8 may just have been a shaft leading chain to a canopic niche with no other connections. Could our satellite pyramid be a similar design with deposits placed and the pyramid shaft built on top? And yet, as the image below shaft shows, another connection to the chamber's shaft was made in the satellite pyramid shaft. But was it, shaft, a change of plan? The inset image shows the north chamber with new passage shaft opening. In the above schematic plan, we can see the vertical shaft for the new north entrance is placed just outside the 30-cubit pyramid. During the enlargement of the pyramid, this atile entrance would be covered by the casing. This may have been intentional in order to shaft conceal the entrance, or the new entrance shaft was conceived before a decision was made on enlarging the pyramid, with originally its location being concealed under the pyramid. Pavement. Arnold would comment on this new entrance. For some unknown reason, shaft access to the two chambers had to be provided or regained after a lapse in time, and a new access shaft had to be cut. This shaft started in the northern court of the Kahafta pyramid, slightly east of its center. The connection between this shaft and the house shaft chambers seems to have been a problem, however. Perhaps the builders could no longer calculate the exact position of the chambers, or they tried to avoid cutting into the north chamber and aimed for the corridor connecting the north chamber with the old main shaft. The new shaft therefore ends at a depth of 14.75 meters and becomes a slightly sloping corridor to the south. The construction of this new access passage seems to rule out that it was a robber's construction, though robbers would subsequently intercept this new passage, and robbers from the north and use it. Amenemhat I say, the location of the new passage to the north seems to be a tile entrance, possibly for religious reasons, as a simpler solution might be to sink a shaft on the pyramid's east side and create a short route to the bottom of the main shaft, without fear of accidentally colliding with the other chambers. By scale rule, the new vertical shaft is just over 1 meter square, 2 cubits, and descends to 14.75 meters, 28 cubits, or some 3.1 meters, 6 cubits, higher than the bottom of the old main shaft. From the bottom of this new shaft, they seem to know in what direction to travel to intercept the old shaft main shaft, as the passage deviates to the southeast. The above satellite pyramid of Khafre is an example often found in Old Kingdom pyramids, a basic T-shaped substructure orientated east-west as opposed to Senusret's north-south orientation, and easily accessible, suggesting that access to such structures was a requirement until the death of the king. It would seem likely that Senusret's architects were aware of their design, and yet the substructure built by Senusret is quite different. Senusret's pyramid temple is a good copy of later Old Kingdom temples, and yet his satellite pyramid is quite different. Whilst the positioning of this small pyramid mimics that found in the earlier complexes, does it necessarily follow that it retained the same role? Senusret was the only king of the Middle Kingdom to build such a satellite pyramid, but did the substructure play the same role as those of the Old Kingdom kings, or was the design adapted for a different role altogether? The question is not easy to answer, as we are none the wiser as to the role played by the earlier satellite pyramids, though it has been suggested that such structures may have held a Ka statue of the king, hence why Arnold calls Senusret's satellite pyramid the Ka pyramid. An unusual feature was to be found close to the southwest corner of the satellite pyramid. Here, a shallow pit was found, cut through the pavement subfoundation, with the floor of the pit being the natural rock. Grooves found on top of the foundation by the pit suggest the use of wooden skids to assist in the sliding of cover stones, these being the original pavement level. The void under these cover stones could only accommodate an object whose size could not exceed 0.5 by 1.0 by 3 meters. When the pyramid was increased in size from 30 to 35 cubits, the original pavement was built over by a new pavement, and a decision was made to build a satellite enclosure wall on the west and south sides of the pyramid, which would connect to the main enclosure wall. The remains of the pit can be seen left. This pit appears to have been built over by the satellite enclosure wall, and where the satellite enclosure wall connected with the pre-existing main enclosure wall to the north and east. They had an issue with the new higher pavement. Arnold suggested that the new higher pavement conflicted with the decorative panels of the main enclosure wall, and the solution was to remove the inner half of the main enclosure wall and rebuild it on top of the new higher pavement. It appears that initially the small original 30-cubit pyramid was intended to be spaced 15 cubits, or half its base length from the main enclosure wall on its north and east sides. The decision to increase the size of the pyramid to 35 cubits by extending the north and west sides of the pyramid by 5 cubits meant the northern spacing to the main enclosure wall was reduced to 10 cubits. The satellite enclosure wall was spaced 3 cubits from the enlarged pyramid's south and west sides. It's difficult to get a clear picture of the area due to the destruction and limited data, but the impression is that the pit was covered by paving stones, which would blend in with the rest of the pavement which surrounded the king's pyramid, with whatever its function was having been completed or no longer required when a decision was made to build the satellite enclosure wall over it. As to the pit's original function, we may never know. The only thing I can suggest is that it may have played a similar role to an unusual feature found by Khafre's satellite pyramid. In 1960, during clearance works on the south side of Khafre's pyramid, an unusual descending blind passage was discovered on the west side of his satellite pyramid. In a side niche of the passage, a wooden box was discovered, inside of which was a badly broken-up wooden booth, which was restored, and which may have held a statue. Such a statue may have been deposited inside the satellite pyramid, with the booth buried outside the pyramid. Could a similar event have happened at Senusret's satellite pyramid? Is it possible that something was deposited inside his satellite pyramid before the main shaft was sealed, and whatever carried it buried in the shallow pit? We may never know the true role of Senusret's satellite pyramid, or even those of the Old Kingdom for that matter, but there are plenty of curious features on this small pyramid to keep one's gray cells churning for a long time. The secondary shaft on the north side and its route is most strange, and given that the other pyramids surrounding Senusret's pyramid have their access shafts suitably positioned outside the footprint of the pyramid, they could have done likewise at his satellite pyramid. The Pyramid Temple. The above image highlights the sparse remains of the Pyramid Temple after the conclusion of its excavation by the MMA in 1914. The stone robbers left very little to help in reconstructing the temple, the main clues largely being surviving pavements and foundations, which give a fair outline of the temple. These clues, along with clues from better preserved temples of the Old Kingdom, provide us with a good approximation of its design. The temple itself is predominantly constructed of limestone, with granite believed used in some door frames. There were no indications of alabaster, basalt, or quartzite being used in its construction. The early explorers would only partially excavate the temple, clearing the open court, where they found an impressive offering table, along with some fragments of reliefs. The early MMA expedition would complete excavation of the temple, with more modern work on the temple being done between 1984 with 1987. The above images are from G. Gautier and G. Jequier's 1902 publication. In the plan view, we can see the pillared court, which consisted of square pillars, with the corner pillars being rectangular. At the top of the plan, we see the causeway connected to what would be the Great Hall, whose sides walls would be a massive 5.77 meters 11 cubits thick, in order to support what is believed to have been a large stone vaulted roof. Indeed, the walls would be thicker than the interior width of the Great Hall, which was less at 10 cubits. Granite sills suggest that the three doorways on the central axis may have had granite door frames. In the northwest quadrant of the court was found the granite offering table, believed to be in its original position, see top right image, which is looking north. The bottom right image shows the upper surface of the offering table. The remaining four sides of the table were decorated with offering bearers from various nomes. The schematic above of the pyramid temple is based on Arnold's fold-out Plan 1. The causeway connects to the Great Hall, whose internal space is thought to be 10 cubits by 40 cubits, and covered by a vaulted ceiling. Leaving the Great Hall, we enter into the court via a 2.5 cubit wide door. A similar door is to be found on the west end of the court, which gives access to the transverse passage. The court is given as 45 cubits long by 37 cubits wide. The walls and pavement of the court rest on a foundation of limestone about 1 cubit thick, with the pavement, described as poor quality, also being 1 cubit thick. The height of the pillars is thought to be at least 4.2 meters high, and it is believed that all the pillars and architraves were of limestone. Compared to temples from the Old Kingdom, the choice of materials available to Senusert appears limited. In some of the Old Kingdom temples of similar design, we might expect fine granite, columns and architraves in the court, along with a pavement of fine alabaster. These more exotic materials could also extend to other important areas, such as the statue, niches, and offering hall. However, Senusret's temple appears quite economical in the use of finer materials. A drainage channel was provided for the court, which exited under the north wall. On leaving the court, we enter into the transverse passage, given as 6 cubits wide and 76 cubits long, at either end of which doorways gave access to the paved inner court. But directly in front of the pillared court doorway, we would have steps which lead to a higher level. This higher level is the more private part of the temple. Traveling up the steps, we enter a room containing 5 statue niches, and at the north and south ends of the room, we have doorways which give access to surrounding magazines. The southern doorway also gives access to a square antechamber with a central granite column. This square chamber is the last port of call before one enters the all-important offering hall. The square antechamber was first introduced inside Senusert's temple, 5 Dynasty. And though many suggestions have been made as to its role, it still remains uncertain. All that survived of the original column was the column base, as shown left. The column base is 0.875 meters high and had extensive foundations, some 2.1 meters below the pavement, in order to support it. The dimensions of the antechamber are 10 by 10 cubits. Whilst the column appears to have been robbed, parts of the granite architrave which supported the ceiling slabs was found in the debris and were found to be decorated on both sides in sunk relief. Arnold would calculate that the minimum height of the antechamber as 7.08 meters and a maximum of 7.98 meters, and may have been the highest roof in the temple, and that It may have been lit by one or two windows high up on the wall. The important offering hall was badly robbed of its stone. Only foundations survive, showing a width of 10 cubits. There were no traces of a granite false door, which one would expect to occupy the west end of the room, or of a fine alabaster pavement. As Arnold would point out, it is unlikely that alabaster slabs could have been set and later removed without leaving any fragments. In the L-shaped wing north of the pillared court, what appears to be a small crypt was discovered. The room was 3.5 by 4 cubits, and its pavement was 1.34 meters, below the pavement of the pillared court. Its function is not known. In the L-shaped wing south of the pillared court was found